Okay, this morning I'm going to be talking about discipleship and the path. And I will begin it with a reading from the book called Illumination from the Agni Yoga series of books. And then I'm going to talk to you about the spiritual path from the esoteric point of view, the different stages of discipleship. And as you listen to these different stages, see if you can position yourself there, in your consciousness, with your service, and so forth. I think you'll enjoy this. So let me begin with reading this quote. Who then are my people? Those who do not feel any place to be their home. Those who do not attach any value to objects. Those who love to ascend mountains, who love the singing of birds, who value the air of the morning hour, who value action more than time, who understand flowers, who display fearlessness without noticing it, who abhor gossip, who esteem the manifestation of the joy of beauty, who understand the life beyond the limits of the visible, who feel when one can partake of Amrita, and Amrita is a nectar, who hasten to fulfill the prophecy. These, my people, can use my power. The nectar of immortality. Okay, the path. There's a great idea, a great teaching in esoteric philosophy, which says that everything in nature can progress. An atom, a flower, a tree, an animal, a man, a planetary life, which ensouls a planet, a solar life, which is the light and life of this solar system. Nothing stops life where it is. It unfolds and expands and radiates towards infinity. This progress is what we call the path of evolution, the path of spiritualization toward greater freedom, greater expansion, and greater blooming. Now, there are two ways a person can progress or advance. The first, in the ageless wisdom, we are told that there is a call, which comes from God, from the cosmic source, from the almighty power in the universe, which calls back the pilgrims on the path. All depends upon the ability of the human soul to respond to this call. The call is always there, waiting to be heard, but the little divine spark does not hear it, being in a state of spiritual sleep. The call is the sound of this great cosmic being calling the pilgrim back home. 2. Through the unconscious evolution of pain and suffering, the person reaches a stage where one day the call is suddenly heard. It is not necessarily a word, but a sudden awareness, a sudden sensation. When the call is heard, this is the start of the path of discipleship. Now, prior to his stepping onto the path, the person was an individual who was drinking and smoking, wasting his energies, living a very self-centered life. Suddenly, this awakening person sits there and starts to think, What am I doing? Where am I going? The probationer disciple is surprised by this new mood, laughs at him or herself, and then forgets all about it, continuing to live life as it was before. But this call then hits again and again, but in more difficult conditions, even on different occasions, and assumes a new importance. The pilgrim listens to it a little longer and slowly notices that the palette of his life is changing. There is a growing disagreement within him. He is becoming divided into two poles between which comes clouds of pain and storms. He tries to change his life to agree with this new urge. He tries to pray, to be nice, to be helpful. He tries not to lie, not to hate. He asks those he has hurt for forgiveness. But very soon, he finds himself submerged in his former habits. This goes on life after life, and he witnesses that he is torn now between these two poles of staying the same and responding to the call which is the purpose of his life. The call which will lead him back home. He feels caught between these two poles and finally realizes that a decision is imperative to create peace within himself. Here, the call hits the pilgrim a little harder, and a little fire starts in his heart, a spiritual fire. He feels that there is something, somewhere, which he must find, a beauty, a love, a service toward which he can aspire. He now becomes an aspirant on the path. In his aspiration, the person feels the call, traveling from place to place, from lecture to lecture, from book to book, from one teacher to another, to find the object of his or her aspiration. Many times he sees the object, but when he extends his hand to touch it, it disappears, leaving behind a patch of clouds, which in a short time fades away, leaving him with a feeling of great loneliness. So he searches again. He worships beauty in any form because he senses an object of his heart's longing within each beauty. Are you recognizing yourself in it? It's so amazing. It's beautiful. He becomes a devotee to great images, to holy ones. He becomes a person of prayer. He becomes a mystic. And he approaches people and communicates with them with his heart. He tries to answer the inner call through his love, his dedication, his purity, his service, and his selflessness. And this path continues, life after life, through deep joys and through great sorrows and sufferings. But he never ceases to hear the call. One day, when the fire within his heart starts to burn stronger, he gives a greater response to the call, and he becomes what is called in the esoteric tradition an accepting disciple. Because of his past experiences, he accepts the following. 5. acceptances. The first is the teachings of the great masters. 2, the unity of life. 3, the fact of reincarnation. 4, the law of karma, or cause and effect. And 5, the existence of the spiritual planetary hierarchy. The accepting disciple first accepts the teachings of the great ones and sees that they all teach about the path of perfection. He feels also that they all are coming from the same source to lead people from darkness to light. Do you see the unity coming together here? Recognizing that there are many paths to God, but they're all leading to the one source. Let me repeat this. He feels also that they are all coming from the same source to lead people from darkness to light. It is at this point a great tolerance dawns in his heart toward the wisdom of the ages. Second, the accepting disciple accepts the fact of the unity of life. Although he feels that he does not know much about this unity, he still accepts it as fact and starts to live accordingly. At this point, the accepting disciple starts to think in terms of one life, to act in terms of one life. And this makes the person a great lover of the living forms of any kingdom. He feels the existence of the law of synthesis and tries to penetrate into its mysteries. You know, what just came to mind, an example would be St. Francis of Assisi. How he loved plants and flowers and animals and people and nature, you know. Third, the accepting disciple accepts the fact of reincarnation. This is one of the teachings of the great masters, but he finds out that this law of reincarnation is a very complicated law, and he decides to learn about it from true sources. The disciple knows that this world is a school, and days are like lives, and he comes back to school, life after life, to learn his lessons and to graduate from the wheel of rebirth. I think that the first time that all of this made sense to me, not something that I was fantasizing or had hoped for, but something that it's like there could be no other answer but this, was when a young family member passed on. He was in his young 20s, early 20s, and he lost his life helping another person. And I remember going back to my husband's and my place of business and seeing his mangled car there in the garage. And I said, that's when I knew. I had, you know, this car, this mangled car, is part of the material life. His spirit is still alive. And then his spirit, if you can allow me to say this, began to reaffirm for me the fact of the continuity of life. And symbols and signs and things that were extraordinary, that was not just happenstance or just, you know, a fluke or a random, you know, experience. And that's when I knew that my studying was not just, you know, the experiences of words of another person, but, you know, this is something I believe so much in that nothing can shake me from my belief system because of that experience. And then these experiences have continued. But he was the first to give such a terrific gift. The disciple knows that this world is a school, and days are like, I'm repeating myself, I realize that. This is, by the way, a chapter from the book that I wrote called Discipleship and Human Progress, so you can get it in that book. The disciple knows that this world is a school and days are like lives, and he comes back to school, life after life, to learn his lessons and to graduate from the wheel of rebirth. The accepting disciple accepts the law of cause and effect, the law of action and reaction, the law of sowing and reaping. After he accepts this law, he lives in such a way that his actions, his emotions, and his thoughts become seeds of joy, of progress, of beauty, instead of bringing heavy debts to his accounts. He tries to live a goal-fitting life, a creative and constructive life, a life of service. This keeps the disciple I can't believe, I can't understand what this is saying. That's cute. Okay, let me make something up here. This keeps the disciple spiritual. How's that? Okay. And in this process, his or her life slowly becomes more and more spiritually organized. First, he accepts the existence of the hierarchy and its disciples, or the group of perfected human beings, the masters, the head of whom is the Christ. He accepts that they, like himself, lived a long life of self-exertion, of discipline, of sacrifice, who mastered their physical, emotional, and mental bodies and became free souls, who consciously contacted the purpose of the great life of the planet, who formulated the plan for humanity, and in great love and compassion led humanity from the unreal to the real. They are great ones who suffered through many, many lives, who carried great burdens on their shoulders in behalf of their fellow men, and eventually became perfect in their love and in their compassion. He accepts that they watch over the steps of each pilgrim. This is the accepting disciple I'm still talking about here. He accepts that they watch over the steps of each pilgrim and are ready to extend their hand in loving understanding whenever there is sincerity of motive and the spirit of selfless living. We have some examples of those who lived selflessly, and here's one. A well-known person was John Muir. He was born in 1838 and died in 1914. Yet to many of us, he is still very much alive. He was born in Scotland, in Dunbar. He was one of the most famous conservationists of his time. He influenced President Roosevelt to form America's first national park. What distinguishes John Muir's discipleship is his universality and oneness with nature. And here's some quotes by him. He said, "Everybody needs beauty as well as bread, places to play in and places to pray in, where nature may heal and give strength to body and soul." He said, "Every hidden cell is throbbing with music and life, every fiber thrilling like harp strings, while incense is ever flowing from the balsam bells and leaves. No wonder the hills and groves were God's first temples, and the more they are cut down and hewn into cathedrals and churches, the farther off and dimmer seems the Lord himself." He also said, "Let children walk with nature. Let them see the beautiful blendings and communions of death and life, their joyous inseparable unity as taught in woods and meadows, plains and mountains, and streams of our blessed star. And they will learn that death is stingless indeed, and as beautiful as life." The grand show is eternal, he said. It is always sunrise somewhere. The dew is never dried all at once. A shower is forever falling. Vapor is ever rising. Eternal sunrise, eternal dawn and gloaming. It's Scottish. Eternal dawn and gloaming on sea and continents and islands, each in its turn, as the round earth rolls. Isn't that magnificent? The accepting disciple feels, and then with clear reasoning, finds out that on this stage of the path of discipleship, his perfection is not yet in full bloom, but he is on the way of gradual unfoldment. There are greater treasures in him not yet revealed or released. There is still no direct communication with the Master. The accepting disciple has no communication with masters, but yet feels their guiding light and their powerful love for humanity. The accepting disciple accepts all of this with great faith and intuitional feeling, and eventually decides to lay down his life for all those things that he or she believes. The next stage is the pledged disciple. A pledged disciple becomes a worker for the cause of the one humanity. To render his pledge properly, he puts his physical, emotional, and mental nature under severe discipline and economy. The pledged disciple saves all his energy, time, money, and talents to dedicate them for the service of humanity under the impression of his highest vision. The pledged disciple tries to clean all his negativity or her negativity, emotional in the emotional and mental bodies, and then tries to develop the powers of his soul. He masters his vehicles by controlling the mechanical functioning of these three bodies, and becomes finally a self-actualized person. The pledged disciple feels that he is in the presence of a great light, and all his actions on the three levels come under the influence of this light and become purified to fit the goal of service. He owns nothing for himself. The great service owns him. When such a life continues long enough, incarnation after incarnation, and if he persists towards his goal in spite of conditions, in spite of many hindrances and obstacles and attacks, the watching eyes decide to give yet another call and finally accepts the person as a co-worker. The next stage, now we're going from the pledged disciple to the next stage, which is the accepted disciple. So we have aspirant, accepting disciple, pledged disciple, and now accepted disciple. The person then and now becomes a chela, an accepted disciple. The accepted disciple may meet a great one and may consciously communicate with humanity and hierarchy through his or her master. He starts to visit the ashrams of his ray in higher mental or upon intuitional levels. There, the accepted disciple learns about and becomes impressed by the plan and his role in it. On this stage, greater responsibilities descend upon his or her shoulders, invoking greater sacrifice, greater wisdom, and greater love. the person dedicates his or her whole life to the fulfillment of the plan. This is God's plan, which slowly becomes clearer in his mind. Now, he or she is a person of responsibility. The disciple is aware of the great unity. He or she sees beyond the planet, and the greater visions of solar life penetrate into his heart. At this stage, the accepted disciple proves that he can be trusted by the great ones. And now initiation. Thus, the great eyes watch him and her, life after life. And when they see that the chalice of the disciple is in formation, and the fire of the chalice has the needed strength, they initiate the person into the greater mysteries of the plan. And the disciple stands in the presence of that great life, which is called the Ancient of Days. It is at this point the service of the initiate disciple increases, and his contact with the spiritual hierarchy becomes more and more frequent. He leaves great impressions of light and love and power wherever he incarnates, becoming a path for many others. The Master contacts the accepted disciple through these 5 ways. The first is through a vivid dream experience, and actually all 5 ways becomes part of his or her experience, but it starts with a vivid dream experience. Typically it does. Then through a symbolic teaching. Then using a thought form of the Master. You see why we create that thought form on the day of the Master? Okay. Through contact in meditation. And then a definite remembered interview in the ashram, in the Master's ashram. A disciple on the thread. If the pledged disciple continues such a life of responsibility, then through greater obstacles and more challenging situations, he is invited to a greater labor. The disciple initiate progresses on the path, becoming a disciple on the thread. The stage wherein, having shown his wisdom in work and his appreciation of the Master's problem, the Chela is taught how, in emergencies, listen to this carefully, in emergencies, to attract the Master's attention and thus draw on his strength and knowledge and advice. This is an instantaneous happening and practically takes none of the Master's time. This stage has a peculiar name of a disciple on the thread, or the Sutratma. Then progressively and eventually, the disciple on the thread becomes a disciple in the aura of the Master. This is a stage where the Chela is permitted to know the method whereby he may set up a vibration and call, which will entitle him to an interview with the Master. This is only permitted to those trusted Chelas who can be depended upon not to use the knowledge for anything except the need of the work. No personality reason or distress would prompt them to use it. At this stage, the Chela is called the disciple within the aura of the Master. Next is a disciple in the heart of the Master. This is a stage where the Chela can get his Master's ear at any time. He is in close touch, always. This is a stage wherein the Chela is being definitely prepared for an immediate initiation or having taken initiation is being given specialized work to do in collaboration with his master. The Chela at this stage is described as the disciple within his master's heart. And finally, the disciple initiate reaches a maturity, entering into the path of mastership, and eventually becomes a master of wisdom. Now, the person is a perfect human being. And as far as our planet is concerned, a person who has overcome all the involutionary urges of his physical, emotional, and mental nature, and the limitations of time and distance. This is the path which all those who heard the call will follow. The Tibetan master once gave his disciples a wonderful suggestion by saying, "My brother, let your horizon be wide and your humility great." In closing, discipleship is the path to becoming one's true self. It is the process of changing from being the not self to becoming the self, from the unreal to the real. It is living a life of reality. To live anything less is to live a life of delusion, a life of pretending or imitating. Discipleship is about self-actualization. It is about experience and application. It is a self-initiating process of striving that takes time, even lifetimes. The Buddha, in instructing his disciples, said, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. Speak or act with an impure mind, and trouble will follow you, as the wheel follows the ox that draws the cart. We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. Speak or act with a pure mind, and happiness will follow you as your shadow, unshakable. Look how he abused me and beat me, how he threw me down and robbed me. Live with such thoughts, and you live in hatred." And that's it. Thank you for letting me read the talk this morning. I typically don't do that, but there's so much to get in, and I wanted to make sure we covered the whole talk and all the information contained in it. So, do you have any questions?
Yes. For the disciple on the thread,
I can't answer anything about the disciple on the thread. Any other question? The reason being is that it will be strictly intellectual questions, so you want to feel it, in your heart. Any other questions?
I just have a comment. I remember reading about how George Washington went into the woods and supposedly met with Helena Rourke. That's a story, and I'm just wondering if he was that disciple who needed to contact his master, or a great one at that time in the war, so that he could, know what the next move was.
Right. I would not be surprised. Okay, so just when you think you're really hot stuff, think of all these different stages of discipleship, or different stages of the unfolding light of our soul. And it is humbling.